Welcome to the Trump Breaking News Network, your daily source for up-to-the-minute Trump news. Join us today and every day. Here's today's news.
This is TBNN.
Trump ends a covert CIA program funding rebels in Syria. By Kali Brown Julie. The CIA has been creating, arming, and funding terrorists for a very long time. They were responsible for Al-Qaeda, and now they're in part responsible for ISIS. This isn't new information, though many people are completely unaware of these operations because mainstream media doesn't report on these topics, not being in the US government's best interests to do so. We've written about it countless times. Here, and here are a few examples out of many. What is new is that Trump has decided to end a covert CIA program that funded rebels in Syria, and mainstream media actually covered the story. The program was designed to aid anti-Assad rebels by arming them and paying them monthly salaries. Not only did Trump stop this program, but the Washington Post actually reported on the story. Though the mainstream media outlet did push the anti-Russia/Trump narrative, suggesting that Trump's decision was motivated by his desire to work with Russia, this is still a step in the right direction. Trump ends covert CIA program that funded Syrian rebels. The U.S. has been funding the Syrian war for quite some time, so it's clear that they have a vested interest. U.S. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard even proposed a bill recently in an effort to put an end to this government corruption, titled the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, which only received an alarming 13 supporters. Gabbard publicly discussed the U.S.'s interests in the Syrian war, as the U.S. sells arms to ISIS and other terrorist groups, offering a compelling call to action in the process. I return to Washington, D.C. with even greater resolve to end our illegal war to overthrow the Syrian government. I call upon Congress and the new administration to answer the pleas of the Syrian people immediately and support the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. We must stop directly and indirectly supporting terrorists, directly by providing weapons, training and logistical support to rebel groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and indirectly through Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and Turkey, who, in turn, support these terrorist groups. We must end our war to overthrow the Syrian government and focus our attention on defeating Al-Qaeda and ISIS. You can read our CE article about it here. Trump apparently made the decision to end the program about a month ago, and in-depth details surrounding the program have yet to be released. The only tangible confirmation of the program actually came from President Donald Trump via Twitter. Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, also took to Twitter, quoting an article from the Financial Times. The particular program that Trump decided to end represents further proof that the U.S. government is directly affiliated with rebels and terrorist organizations. To be clear, there's not even proof that the program has 100% ended, as people on the ground haven't confirmed this as stated in the Financial Times article above. However, most mainstream media outlets that reported on it chose to focus on their concern that Trump was hoping to ally with Russia and that this was his motive for choosing to end the program, rather than honing in on the Pentagon funding rebels. Of course, that was all just speculation. For example, the New York Times wrote that the decision is bound to be welcomed by the Russians, and USA Today referred to the end of the program as a victory for Assad, Russia, and Iran. What about a victory for the people? Many have referred to some of the rebels as moderate terrorists and some rebels go on to join terrorist organizations. There's no point in speculating whether this was a move that supports Assad or Russia. Ultimately, it's simply a move that has the potential to shift the U.S. regime away from funding rebels and terrorists. The specific program allegedly started in 2013 in hopes of pushing Assad out of power, a long-time goal for the U.S. government, which was reflected in many of their military decisions over the past couple years. This includes their role in funding the White Helmets, an organization funded by the West that's painted as being a group of peacekeepers who provide aid to victims, when in reality most of the help they give is to the terrorists the U.S. is allegedly fighting, when in reality they're funding them. The U.S. government's history of funding rebels and terrorists. Independent journalist Vanessa Beeley speculated that in regards to the creation of the White Helmets, what we are seeing here is an eradication of Syrian state institutions and the implantation of a Syrian shadow state by predominantly the UK and the US, but also supported by EU governments. Essentially, Beeley suggested that the White Helmets could actually be a front for a shadow government. This wouldn't be surprising, as a shadow government already exists in America. Plus the US has been keen on overthrowing Assad. Mainstream media spun this propaganda as an inspiring story of peacekeepers, and Netflix even created a fake documentary on the White Helmets, which you can read more about in our CE article here. The film itself is not a real documentary, explains Patrick Henningsen, a geopolitical analyst at 21st Century Wire. What this film is essentially a PR cushion for a $150 million covert op, which is basically an NGO front funded by USAID, the British Foreign Office, various EU member states, Qatar, and other various and sundry nations, and members of the public, who quite frankly in my opinion and many others, have been duped into donating their money for this rescue group, that is anything but. It essentially functions as a support group alongside al-Nusra and al-Din al-Zinki and other known terrorist groups operating in Syria. The US clearly has a vested interest in Syria, otherwise they wouldn't be supporting terrorists or fabricating stories, one of the more recent ones being the fake chemical weapons attack. You can read more about how there actually was no chemical weapons attack earlier this year in our CE article here. Michel Chossudovsky, an award-winning author, an emeritus professor of economics at the University of Ottawa, and the founder and director of the Center for Research on Globalization, CRG, explained. Trump's decision to strike a Syrian airbase in retaliation for Assad's alleged use of chemical weapons against his own people confirms that the false flag chemical weapons attack scenario first formulated under Obama is still on the table. Our analysis, including a large body of global research investigative reports, confirms unequivocally that Trump is lying, the Western media is lying and most of America's allies are also lying. If there's anyone we should be concerned about using chemical weapons, it's the US government and the terrorists they've trained to use them. Chossudovsky goes on to explain that CNN accused Bashar al-Assad of killing his own people while also acknowledging that the rebels are not only in possession of chemical weapons, but that these moderate terrorists affiliated with al-Nusra are trained in the use of chemical weapons by specialists on contract to the Pentagon. Even Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke out about the Pentagon's ties to terrorists, explaining, "In fact, many of the ISIS fighters and their commanders are ideological and organizational successors to the jihadists that the CIA has been nurturing for 30 years. The CIA began arming and training the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in 1979 to fight the Soviets. Following the Soviet withdrawal, the CIA's Afghan Mujahideen became the Taliban while its foreign fighters, including Osama bin Laden, formed al-Qaeda. In 2004, then British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook told the House of Commons that al-Qaeda took its name, meaning database in Arabic, from the voluminous CIA database of jihadists, Mujahideen foreign fighters and arms smugglers trained and equipped by the CIA during the Afghan conflict. Final thoughts. To be clear, CE is not saying that Trump should or should not side with Russia, and we recognize that there still aren't enough details on this CIA program to make any solid claims. We are not siding with Trump either, but simply presenting what we know. The U.S. government must stop funding rebels associated with terrorists and terrorists in general, and we are hopeful that this could be a step towards achieving that.
That's the news. Join us here every day. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell. See you next time.
This is TBNN.